Spotlight is proudly sponsored by HEC Media, St. Louis's home for arts, education, and culture.
Today on Spotlight, Y.W.C.A engineers explore the idea of injecting particles into the stratosphere to help cool the planet. And then how the Y.W.C.A has been helping others since the World's Fair. Plus, the lessons a local animal rescue teaches humans to help save the lives of dogs. But first, 3 experts explain the story of the Delmar Divide. It's Sunday, and you're watching the multiple Emmy Award-winning Spotlight.
The Delmar Divide, which is a really catchy phrase for this really complex thing here in St. Louis.
Not only the history of segregation, but the way that that still plays out today in St. Louis, and some of the kind of socioeconomic disparities that have come along with that we can see within a couple blocks along this city street.
The public health disparities, the wealth disparities are real between south and north of Delmar. However, my strong feelings are that Delmar Divide is oftentimes a bastardization of the story of the communities north of Delmar.
To help deconstruct the meaning of the Delmar Divide, from its mixed history to some of the revitalization going on today, we spoke with 3 experts who each give walking tours of different St. Louis neighborhoods. Aaron Williams in the Ville, Ryan Deloche in Dutchtown, and Amanda Clark in Laclede's Landing, where colonial St. Louis began.
The Delmar Divide, a lot of people think of just Delmar the street, or maybe they're thinking of the Central West End or the Loop, right? They're thinking of a midtown kind of away from the river, because we as modern St. Louisans have turned our backs to the river. But we have to start here when we're talking about the Delmar Divide, because this is where those complexities of modern St. Louis begin. So we're standing here on Morgan Street in Laclede's Landing. Cool street to get to show folks, because this is Delmar. This is the street that becomes Delmar. It starts at the riverfront. That Missouri came into the Union as a slave state, as part of the Missouri Compromise. And when you're standing here and you're thinking about, what happened here and the decisions that were made, and then you realize you're looking right across the Mississippi River at a free state, and we can kind of, again, pick apart those layers of that story. And
around that same time, one of those layers was developing just north of the Divide, a thriving Black community often referred to as the Ville.
When someone says Delmar Divide, they don't say, yeah, and Scott Joplin lived north of Delmar. In fact, his house is right there on Delmar or Morgan Street. They don't say the Club Riviera was one of Black St. Louis's favorite clubs in the city or the entire region. And it was literally on Delmar, representing the Black side of the Delmar Divide, which is what we now understand to be North St. Louis. So I like to position the story in a way where I can celebrate those things, right? We're standing in the Ville community in front of a mural of Tina Turner, who grew up in the Ville, graduated from Sumner High School. And in that same community, you had prizes like Homer G. Phillips Hospital. You had Annie Malone's Poor Old College. All these things that really anchored the Black community in success.
But as with many places across the region and the country, red line laws and other segregationist rules wore down some of those successes in the Ville, until a groundswell of community organizing that began in the late 1970s and really picked up momentum in the wake of the Ferguson protests.
Here recently, for the Ville and the city's city planning and urban design agency have begun the neighborhood planning process and the MLK corridor character planning process. So over the next year, we will be doing some deep planning work with community members to decide what we want this community to look like in the future and what we want this corridor to look like in the future.
In the Dutchtown neighborhood, the dividing line was actually along Chippewa Street for much of the last century, with most of the Black population to the north and the white residents to the south. But things started to change in the 1980s in a different, unexpected way.
So when we talk about the population in Dutchtown today, yes, there's a large Black population, there's a large white population, but there's also a growing Hispanic population in this area, and a growing immigrant population. People from all over the world, all moving in and starting to have businesses and things that cater to those populations.
Ironically, that melting pot of diversity has now become one of the selling points for the neighborhood.
Yeah, and I think in some ways, it does provide some type of template, right? When we're talking about St. Louis and segregation today, right? There are a lot of neighborhoods that are very segregated. And this is kind of a template of how that can change within a relatively short period of time. And people can be intentional about that and welcoming people to those different neighborhoods.
That type of energy has brought the support of groups like St. Louis Development Corporation. As 2 years ago, they opened the Northside Economic Empowerment Center to bring small business support opportunities and entrepreneurship support opportunities right to the heart of the Ville community, north of the Delmar Divide. So our civic and public leaders are doing the work that we need to be done to preserve and restore a lot of these communities north of Delmar that we oftentimes show pity for. We want to restore that pride and support the community work that's already happening here. And I would say that it is definitely being done.
I think part of it does have to do with the density of the area, right? And part of it has to do with the input of people in the community that are pushing for these properties and things to be repurposed, but not just to be repurposed, but to be repurposed in a way that it's an asset for the community and that it actually serves the community that's here rather than trying to bring people, from somewhere else. This is redevelopment that's geared towards the community that's already here and that already exists in the neighborhood.
What's great about my job and interesting about what I get to do is kind of dismantling that, taking it apart, and helping people realize that not only is it not as simple as black and white, but it is not as simple as one side of the street or the other side of the street.
If you'd like to learn more about the Delmar Divide and its evolution, visit the STL Walking Tours page on the Missouri History Museum website.
For more St. Louis stories, subscribe to the HEC YouTube channel. Connect STL from HEC Media.
Wildfires spark new research in the Air Lab at Washington University in St. Louis. Principal investigator Rajan Chakrabarty is igniting new areas of study after wildfire chasing in the western U.S. in 2019. This is Ground Zero.
Sponsored by NASA and NOAA. 45 days we were camping out of a mobile laboratory, packed up with all sorts of instruments to study the physical properties, the optical properties of the smoke, which was being emitted from the fires. And similar instruments were also packed in the aircraft, and then this was further synchronized with the satellites. That study was the starting point of our discoveries which unfolded.
Now, the Aerosol Interdisciplinary Research Lab, called the Air Lab, is taking its new discoveries about wildfires to a new level, into the stratosphere. He focused on wildfire emissions of black carbon and the lab's new discoveries about organic dark brown carbon particles that enhance the absorption of sunlight and warm the atmosphere.
So these particles, once they get emitted into the stratosphere, could cause enhanced warming. In the stratosphere, the lifetime of these particles is up to 6 months.
With the intensity of the threat of light-absorbing particles or climate heaters in the stratosphere, the team is interested in the idea of arming the stratosphere with particles that instead reflect light for a cooling effect. It would offset global warming from other causes too. Those aerosols are tested with specialized equipment. The goal is to inject the particles into the stratosphere to reflect the sun's rays before they can warm the planet.
So this particular modality of solar radiation management is called stratospheric aerosol injection, SAI, S-A-I.
If there is a heat dome with excessive and dangerous heat, consider the approach like a Band-Aid.
For the whole global warming phenomena, but this is more of a local or a regional warming. There has been different transportation mechanisms. One is, take a load of this material in an aircraft all the way up to the stratosphere and just inject it.
Chuck Ribardi and his collaborators explore stratospheric aerosol injection with a $1.5 million grant from the Simons Foundation International. So WashU engineered the equipment to test different particles to discover the right one for the job.
To study the optical properties of these particles that are proposed to be injected into the stratosphere. In this case, what we're trying to see is whether when these particles are produced in large quantities, in large manufacturing units, there are some imperfections that creep in to these particles. And those could trigger certain absorption, which we do not want in the stratosphere. We ideally just want them to reflect back the radiation and not absorb any of it and trap the heat in the stratosphere.
All starting with a database of optical and chemical properties of the most promising aerosol candidates for the mission.
What this shaking and the clean air going through the flask does is it suspends the particles into the airstream, and then those are sent to some conditioning units where we make sure that the particles are not too large, they don't have any extra charge, because that is the sort of thing that can affect the measurements which we're trying to make, which is of the optical properties. The final decision of whether it's a good candidate or not would be made through climate modeling studies.
Our atmosphere is one giant chemical reactor, and we are just trying to only get a handle on a small piece of it. Injection is to prevent the spread of a disease. So here the disease is rising temperatures, and so what you are trying to inject are small mirrors which are reflecting sunlight, such that the temperature of the earth comes down. It's more of a band-aid solution. It's more of trying to stop its symptoms from showing up until we find a permanent solution.
HEC Media, recognized, celebrated, honored time and again for excellence in the industry. HEC Media has been bringing home the hardware for over a decade. Arts and education to author talks, magazine shows and documentaries, individual craft achievements to overall excellence. Find all of the award-winning content at hecmedia.org.
History Spotlight, brought to you by HEC Media and the Missouri Historical Society.
Hello, I'm Dr. Jody Sowell, president of the Missouri Historical Society in St. Louis, and this is History Spotlight. The Y.W.C.A. was initially introduced to St. Louis during the 1904 World's Fair, and a year later was incorporated to serve rural women. But women of color were excluded from their services until 1946. Public historian of the African American History Initiative, Cecily Hunter, tells the story of how a group of black women set out to start their own branch in 1911 that operated independently for 35 years.
Though the Y.W.C.A. has a rich national history, African American women in St. Louis operated as a segregated branch for 35 years before merging their efforts with the local Y.W.C.A. in 1946. The Y.W.C.A. was initially introduced to St. Louis during the 1904 World's Fair, and a year later was incorporated to serve rural women. But women of color were excluded from their services. In 1911, a group of black women led by Arsenio M. Williams gathered at Berea Presbyterian Church to discuss establishing a home for black women. Arsenio was an educator and a member of the Committee on Administration who led the Colored Women's Christian Association, the president of the National Association of Colored Women, and the vice president of Colored Women's Federation. Soon after setting up their own organization, the women petitioned the local and national Y.W.C.A. and requested an official branch open to serve their community. The white women leadership of the Y.W.C.A. agreed to the request, but demanded that they oversee the branch as an advisory group and control the group's finances and management. The organization opened its doors as the Chapman Branch, named after Louise Chapman, a previous Y.W.C.A. board member. But in 1912, It was renamed the Phyllis Wheatley Y.W.C.A. in honor of a formerly enslaved woman who was the first Black woman poet to publish in the United States. The St. Louis location served as the 5th branch to open in the nation for Black women and girls. It wasn't until 1946 that at the 17th National Convention in St. Louis that the Y.W.C.A. St. Louis and Phyllis Wheatley branch would adopt its interracial charter and merge both groups together. A few years later, in 1949, the National Convention of the Y.W.C.A. adopted a renewed commitment to serve and incorporate minority communities into their mission. Today, the Y.W.C.A. Metro St. Louis mission is eliminating racism, empowering women, and promoting peace, justice, freedom, and dignity for all.
Next week on History Spotlight, how St. Louis University helped shape the sport of football as we know it.
To learn more about the Missouri Historical Society, visit mohistory.org. Later on Spotlight, a 3-time Grammy-nominated husband and wife duo. It's the road less traveled, especially this early in the morning.
It is 5:55 a.m. We're picking up our first dog for spay-neuter today.
Deanna Savi says this is the right path because her destination is headed for change.
I've been in rescue for years and years, and we can rescue from now until the end of time, but the only thing that's going to really make a difference is to stop dogs from being on the streets in the first place. And this is one of the big ways to do that. I'm going to have you hold this, because I'm going to take him and get him in the van, and then I'm going to have you sign some stuff, okay?
Savi is a volunteer with nonprofit animal rescue group, the Gateway Pet Guardians. But today, she's not rescuing animals.
Look, and your name's on there, all for you.
Her job is to help the human community members by offering free spay and neuter services for their pets.
Drop off is 7 a.m. at the clinic and pick up is 4 p.m.
Complete with a ride to get them there and back.
Where I live in St. Louis City, there's several vet clinics within a mile of my house, and they don't have that in East St. Louis, so they don't even know where to go if they do want to spay and neuter.
In East St. Louis, stray dogs and owned dogs who roam the street are a familiar sight.
And many people don't understand the benefits of spaying and neutering. And we found that providing the education and the resources, people are very agreeable to it.
An unspayed female can have around 20 puppies a year.
Spaying and neutering 4 or 5 dogs in one day, that's potentially avoiding 20, 30, 40 unwanted litters. I can really see the difference that I'm making in this community, and it's really nice to be making a difference in that end of things.
While Savi drops off dogs at the clinic, another team heads out in the same area in preparation for frigid weekend temperatures. With temps expected to reach single digits, these volunteers are dropping off free supplies to help residents care for their pets.
Okay. Is that good? Yep. Basically, we build relationships with community members and we help supply them with the resources that they need, such as tie-outs, dog houses, collars, leashes. We want to encourage pet owners to bring them indoors, but if they can't or if they won't, we line the dog houses with straw so they can stay warm.
Gateway finds people who need them by word of mouth or just driving around and seeing an animal without proper shelter. Thick, heavy chains are replaced with tie-outs.
They care for their pets. They love their pets. You know, we see it every single weekend. They have limited resources.
Volunteers are paid in thank yous and a gift only a dog can give.
You're welcome. You are welcome.
East St. Louis resident Andre Triplett has 2 dogs he keeps outside. One of them, the Gateway Pet Guardians transported to get neutered this morning.
I appreciate this. I love you guys. Boy, this is a blessing. I sure I was going to have to get some dog houses. I thank you. Appreciate it very much.
They react very positively, and we actually have people in the community flagging us down sometimes to get us to stop and talk to them.
Since the Gateway Pet Guardians outreach program began 13 years ago, they have spayed and neutered more than 6,000 pets. They've handed out hundreds of dog houses and tie-outs and even helped pay for emergency surgeries, vaccinations, and examinations.
We're taking a proactive approach to ending animal homelessness. So we're actually going out in the community, spaying and neutering the pets, keeping them with their families that love them. We don't want to take them away from them. And I think that's what makes Gateway Pet Guardians different.
It's a program that's driving straight for success in hopes to get to a point where they are not needed at all.
HEC has been bringing you positive programming and award-winning content for decades. Arts, education, culture, in-depth discussions, films, and more. All in one place. HECmedia.org.
I love growing up here in St. Louis. It's my foundation.
Marcus Baylor, part of the husband and wife duo called the Baylor Project, returned home to perform at an annual celebration of St. Louis's musical heritage. Music at the Intersection featured 60 artists who performed at venues in the Grand Center Arts District. We spoke with the Baylors at the Sheldon Concert Hall as they reminisced and talked about their careers.
I remember right here at the Fox, I went to go see the Winans Commission, BB and CC, and then you go over to when it was Hotel Majestic, before it was just jazz, and you just think about all those feelings, and now you have the bistro right around the corner. My whole career just being blessed is it's unreal. Growing up here in St. Louis, coming from Ferguson, growing up at Faith Miracle Temple Church where my dad started.
Both Marcus and Jean are PKs, preacher's kids. In church is where they fell in love with music. Jean with vocals. And Marcus with the drums.
I choose you to share my life.
He started at age 2. By age 5, Marcus was the church drummer. The duo says the Baylor Project is built on love, faith, family, culture, and community. But in the beginning, it was a hard sell.
I took a long shower one day and I was like, babe, I know you always wanted to do, jazz, and, I said, we should form a band together and call it the Baylor Project. And you know what she said?
I was like, what is that? And then he started to explain, and then I said, that doesn't make no sense.
No.
That's a dumb idea.
That's what she said.
But the Baylor Project garnered 3 Grammy nominations, 1 for the Best Jazz Vocal Album and 2 for Best Traditional R&B Performance.
It took a minute, but once I got the concept, we really just let it flow naturally, and we just drew from our individual and collective influences. And once we got that, it was smooth sailing from then. And then we could just be creative.
The ensemble has a one-of-a-kind eclectic sound, composed from a diverse blend of music rooted in jazz.
Hey, you gotta breathe, you gotta sit, you gotta let it fall on you. That's just like if you lift your head, if you can just breathe.
When we were meeting with labels, and there was a particular, that said, okay, man, it's hard to get my hands on this because it's like they're all over the place. And I said, actually, yeah, we are. We're like a musical iPod. I grew up with gospel, I grew up with R&B, I grew up with hip hop. All those things are a part of the Black American experience. After being in the industry a while, it's just like, you know what, let's just do what we love and be who we are.
Marcus is recognized as the former drummer of the Grammy Award-winning jazz quartet Yellow Jackets. Jean made her mark as one half of the platinum R&B recording duo Janae. In 2017, their first CD debuted. The Journey, released on their own label Be a Light, hit the Billboard Jazz chart at number 8, Later, it resulted in their first 2 Grammy nominations.
Over the years, I've learned a few simple things.
The journey. It dealt with really our backgrounds of how we grew up and all the music that we love, and just from childhood all the way up to, where we at now.
But you could choose to love them in a perfect way. Oh,
Don't sing with you?
You've gotta laugh and move on.
I thought I had it too, I was confident.
Their second CD, Generations, was released in the summer of 2021. It's a collective celebration of life experiences featuring jazz legends such as Kenny Garrett and Diane Reeves.
Generations is a cultural anthology. It really is. It's so densely packed with culture and everyday lived experiences, family, faith, community, through the generations. And it's definitely, there are themes all through the album that anybody can understand and relate to and draw from their personal experiences, but it's definitely told through the lens of the Black experience.
Why don't you go ahead and sit on down?
A single concept that started in the shower manifested into a flowing dynamic duo, a virtuosic pair with original compositions and newly arranged classics that illustrates what the Baylor Project is all about.
We count our blessings when we count those things that money really can't buy. The wonderful parents that we've been insanely blessed with, just the love in our hearts for one another, and so many things that are immeasurable.
Through the darkness, through the pain, you gave us strength so we can stand again. For the fight, for the right, for life. Oh, Lord, hear my cry. What is this I see before my eyes? Everything that we paid for, it could be left right here on the floor. Not again, never again, no.
Next week, football gained popularity in the late 19th century, how St. Louis University played a role. Plus, we talk to the author of the Mosquito Bowl, a game of life and death in World War II. Thanks for watching Spotlight. Join us next Sunday at 9:30 a.m. on KPLR 11.